New Zealand will become the first country in the world to force financial institutions to report the impact investors are having on the climate. The changes would make reporting mandatory for banks and insurance companies. Joining me live now is New Zealand's Commerce Minister David Clark. Thanks so much for your time, Minister. How will this new law work?
Good morning. Well, we're requiring banks, insurers, listed companies, around 200 in total, will be impacted directly by this, to report their climate risks and opportunities in clear, comparable and consistent ways. That'll mean that investors have information, and the best information to make good decisions about where they invest. And it's part of our contribution, recognising the climate emergency as a country that's signed up to the Paris Accord. We want to make structural changes that'll make a real difference for this generation and for generations to come.
What impact is it going to have on these businesses? Do you see a material impact? I mean, why are you doing it?
Well, look, it will have an impact over time because we know there's risks for investors in terms of stranded assets, in terms of the physical risks present to businesses because of climate change, and there are trends emerging in the markets. Sustainable funds are doing very well currently globally, and we believe by having good, clear information, we'll have efficient allocation of capital, which is really important to the success of markets, to de-risking markets and making sure that capital is supporting good enterprises that make the world a safer place into the future and make for an opportunity to achieve the 1.5 degree maximum temperature rise that all countries that signed the Paris Accord signed up to.
Well, why don't you just leave it up to the markets? I mean, is this a form of government market intervention?
Well, look, it is a way of making sure that markets have good, clear and consistent information. The market locally supports this move. We have clear accounting standards, so people have comparable, consistent information. What investors tend to want is really clear information. Now, we're embarking on a process here where we are the first in the world, and that's pretty exciting, but lots of others are close behind. We've worked closely with the UK. We know the US is looking at doing something similar. The International Accounting Standards Body has put out consultation documents. The EU has signalled it's going in this direction. We're the first, but I know others will follow very quickly behind.
You didn't mention Australia there.
Look, I am not sure exactly where Australia's on this, but lots of the companies operating in New Zealand also operate in Australia, and I've no doubt that once the big companies are required to sign up to this, then others that are searching for private equity, smaller companies will take these standards and use them as their own guidance on how to report, because they'll want to attract capital and they'll want to show that they've thought through the future financial risks that they may face and other risks in a climate change era.
Have you approached your Australian counterpart about this?
I haven't had conversations yet with my Australian counterpart about this, but always open to the conversation and value the close working relationship between our countries.
Why is that, David Clark? Is it because you look at where the Australian debate is around climate change at the moment? Do you think it is just too difficult politically to have that happen here?
Oh, look, I'm not an expert on Australian politics, I'm afraid. But what I can say is that markets themselves, the big players in the markets, are already looking to these risks and are doing a lot of the reporting themselves because they know their investors want to understand this information. We're going to make it easier, obviously, by setting standards from a professional body that will look at the consistency of the information, the comparability of it, so that investors can make good decisions.
I guess banks have been moving away from investing in coal anyway in recent years, but you expect this to push this along even more quickly than anticipated?
Well, look, I do think that people are looking clearly at these issues into the future and wanting for the information. Yes, I do think it makes a contribution to how investors will think about things, where they'll shift away from the risks of, a good example, fossil fuels, the known oil reserves. We can only use a small amount of those oil reserves that are known about in the world if we are to ensure we don't have that runaway global warming that we are trying to protect against here. So people will look to those decisions and understand that governments are going to want to meet their targets, and they'll think carefully about which companies they invest in as a consequence.
This might, indeed, as you say, many companies that operate in New Zealand also operate in Australia. Do you see a situation whereby this could see closures of coal mines, an essential moratorium on new coal mines in Australia? And do you think, renewables and gas are up to speed to be able to take over those jobs so as we don't leave this, I guess, valley of death, if you like?
Look, I think there's global trends happening here. Will this legislation impact on Australia? Well, there are explicit carve-outs for those that are dual listed on the Australian exchange. They won't be required to follow these guidelines unless they're doing over $1 billion worth of business in New Zealand. But I do think that what's going on globally will impact the decisions that people make. This is a step we know we can take locally. We know there's opportunity here for strengthening investment. Ethical investors are looking out for places to invest in the world where they know that they can invest in ethical and companies that are looking to the longer term because they see that as a safe harbour for their investments. So we think there's an advantage to New Zealand in doing this and encouraging those companies that are forward-looking and making sure that they get the investment that they want.